this turnout. I can't believe this turnout. This is really fantastic. And I have to tell you, I feel so at home because I spent a big part of my life in northern Maine, in the northern Maine woods. I have to show you what my daughter gave me for Christmas. It's a water ball hand-painted to look like wood. I am seriously a woods girl, so I'm very happy to be here. I feel at home. And I also realized this is my first talk. I talk about 75, do about 75 engagements a year. This is my first talk since the holiday, so I apologize if I'm a little rusty. But we just figured out how to use, my battery had died in this, so we're going to get going. And I also realized that introduction, I think I have to change because it says her first book is, and I have absolutely no plans to do a second book. Oops. So I either have to write a second book or change that. If there are people stuck standing for lack of seats, we've got some spaces up here. Okay. And another space there. Thanks. Okay. So I just want to settle in for a moment and ask people, that was a great introduction, a reminder of why we are here. We are standing on what many people in this country understand to be stolen land. That would be language that would have been foreign to me at one point. Even if you don't feel that way, you're not comfortable with that language, it's important to recognize that for many people that is the kind of land we're standing on, and that is part of their family narrative. We've made lots of progress. Martin Luther King Day is now a national holiday. A black president. All kinds of advances, and yet we can also see, especially in the last couple of years, as campuses and city streets have erupted with violence and discontent, that we are far from the dream that Martin Luther King envisioned. I want to share with you that I'm deeply conflicted about this holiday for that reason. And because I'm a white woman talking about a black man's dream for black liberation. And so I stand here in a complicated space, and I just want to own that. It can be complicated for white people to participate in racial justice conversations and movements, and yet change can't happen without all of us being a part of the process. So the name of the talk is, I'm a good person, isn't that enough? And I know that this room, because I've been in here talking to people for about an hour, it is full of good people. This is my favorite kind of white audience to work with. And I deeply identify. So for years, I was thinking that being a good person was enough. And I was a little irritated, silently in my head, when I got the impression that something else was expected of me. So when we think about this talk in the context of Dr. Martin Luther King's dream that there will be a day when people are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, we're going to make a connection between being a good person and that. This is a feel-good dream, isn't it? A day where we don't even have to think about race or racism anymore. And that's an easy place for a good person to go. I want to make sure, can people in the back see the slides? No. It needs to be higher? Yeah. So, where's John? Okay, so let's get back to this question. I'm a good person. Isn't that enough? Well, the short answer is no. And what's required is to be willing to get uncomfortable and hear the answer, why that's not enough. That's what we're going to talk about today. So one of the problems is, what is good? And who gets to decide what's good? If you and I have different understandings of good, how are we going to figure out who's good gets to be the right good? So already we're in complicated territory, just using a subjective term, like good. We all get our ideas about what is good, what is right, what is beautiful at very early ages, and this information gets stored in our belief system. So I found this slide online, and I love it when it comes to talking about a belief system, our belief system, because it speaks to the closed circuitness of our belief system, meaning that we use what we already know to make sense of observations and events and comments and people. So what does this mean if your belief system is faulty or full of errors? So anybody in this room could be up here giving a visual racial autobiography, which is what I'm doing. So I'm going to just talk about my own story. It's not because there's anything special about my story. It's because we all have a story. I just happen to have devoted the last 7 years of my life to really honing mine. So where did my knowledge come from? Well, I grew up in a town, Winchester, Massachusetts, an affluent suburb just north of Boston. This is our public library that's gray, and that's the town hall that's red. And if you had said, and did I mention that Winchester was exclusively white or almost exclusively white? Certainly in the 1960s and 70s when I was growing up.
Just interrupt for a second. You turn on the light, but it's washing out your...
Yeah.
Oh.
It's worse.
Better when the lights are off.
They're having a hard time seeing your face.
Oh, my face is so much less interesting than these slides. We can take a selfie together later. Okay, better? Okay, thank you for that. Okay, now, if somebody had said to me when I was growing up, whoa, I look at that picture and all I see is racism, I would have said, are you nuts? Guess what I see now when I see that picture? If it doesn't make sense to you now, in about half an hour, I hope it will. We'll revisit this picture. So this is what my childhood looked like. I was born, as I said, in 1960. So this is a 1960s, 70s New England childhood. Anyone know who these paintings are by? And he was depicted, his job was to depict the all-American life. It was it the Saturday Evening Post? And wasn't that convenient for me, that my life looked just like the all-American life? So I had the privilege of feeling like a belonger right from the get-go, from something as simple as a mainstream artist. There were taboo topics in my household and in my larger community. Anyone else get this? Never talk about religion or politics in polite company? Yeah. Raise your hand if race or racism were discussed in your household daily. Wow, okay. So not many, but some. And I think I'm seeing a trend where some of the raised hands are younger people, so that's a good sign. No, I can count on one hand the time race or racism was brought up in my house, which might lead a person to believe that race or racism had nothing to do with my life. Winchester was really a white bubble, and I did have access to the outside world. It looked like this, in which white families are absolutely normalized. What else is being normalized? Two-parent, heterosexual family, and who knows best? Woohoo! I was so glad I had one of those white fathers. Actually, I didn't even think about being glad or not glad. It was just the way things were. In my household, all my cousins, all my schoolmates, this is what life looked like. I never questioned it. Now, my father and mother, good people. My mother and father loved each other so much, had a great marriage, lasted for years, so they both passed naturally. But my father gave my mother an allowance every week. And that was absolutely standard in the 1960s. So I'm getting a lot of messages now about social roles. I'm pretty clear about what my role is going to be as a female, and I don't know I'm getting ideas about the white role, but I am. It wasn't just my father and the fathers in my neighborhood. It seemed that white men were filling positions of leadership everywhere through all of history. As far as I know, it was just American, United States history. I was young. I wasn't learning about international history at that point. So this is starting to plant in my mind the idea that white men are actually somehow naturally, maybe biologically, fit for leadership. Oh, by the way, that last slide, the lower, the place where President Barack Obama should be is blank because this slide, this collage was put together prior to his administration. He has not been eliminated. Okay, now my family did not talk about race and racism, but there was a really powerful message I got, that the playing field was level. Did anybody else grow up getting the idea that America's playing field was level? How did we get that message? What language? Where did we hear it? Where did you hear it?
I had to work hard and you could be anything you wanted to be.
Work hard and you can be anything you want to be. Pull yourself up by your... Right. Think about our founding documents, about this is a country where it's freedom and liberty and justice for all. And I loved this idea. I didn't only get this idea, I attached myself to it. I felt like I was in the best country in the entire world because it was the only place where anybody could come. And if they worked hard, they could make it. I had so many people in my white Winchester life that had stories that went like this. My great-great-grandparents came here from Italy, Poland, Greece, Russia. With 2 cents in their pockets, they didn't speak a word of English, and look at us now. And it's true. In just a couple generations, they had found the social mobility that's in that promise of a meritocracy, a level playing field. And so this made perfect sense to me. I had no need to question it, so boom, it went into my belief system, filed away, firmly as it could be. Some people say, oh, Debbie, now, I'm really glad you're waking up and your story's really neat, but I did not grow up like you. So I didn't get the ideas you got. And I have to challenge that and say, aren't we all in this country, no matter where we live, no matter what age we are, no matter what ethnicity we are, no matter what racial assignment we've been given, aren't we all exposed to ideas about white, especially white male superiority, every day, in some subtle ways? You know, I started my journey in 2009. It was just a couple years ago. I was like, oh my God, look at the dollar bills. It's so normalized that it can be hard to see it. This is a very, I don't even know who these guys are. But has anyone seen a picture like this? This is the board of directors, right? So if you said to me even today, Debbie, shut your eyes and picture investment bankers, this is what I would picture. Never would I picture these men. Does anybody know who these 50 black men are? These 50 black investment bankers? These 50 men are from Black Wall Street, which was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I didn't know there was such a thing as Black Wall Street until after this book came out. I didn't know that Black Wall Street had 600 businesses, 21 churches, 21 restaurants, 30 grocery stores, 2 movie theaters, 6 private airplanes, 1 hospital, 1 bank, and its own school system. I was a history major and I have an MBA. How did I not know that there was a very significant chapter in American history about Black Wall Street? And why didn't I know that it had been never able to rebuild? Until 9/11, this was considered the #1 act of terrorism on United States soil. And I would say that's in close competition with the displacement of indigenous people. Why don't we know this? And what does it mean that it's missing from our belief systems as we try to embrace a dream and solve a problem that we don't really even probably fully understand? I did know black people existed. Now again, we're talking about social roles. I remember watching Gone with the Wind, and I didn't stop and ask, well, why is that older lady waiting on that 17-year-old girl? Somehow, somewhere, it had gotten into my belief system that it was, in my all-white town, that it was perfectly natural that a black elder should be in a position of servitude. And look at the expression of that 17-year-old girl scolding her. That didn't give me a moment's pause. I find that problematic. I've had to ask myself, well, how early were these images happening? When was I filing away what? But the Babar series, is anyone familiar with the Babar children's book series? Okay, so the protagonist is Babar. He is an elephant. Interesting, because my favorite thing to talk about is the elephant in the room. So it's a French story series that's been translated into English. So I had the whole collection. And you know how little kids will watch a video 100 times, read a book 100 times? I know I read what I saw, the pictures I'm about to show you, hundreds of times, yet I have no memory of them. For those of you who can't see, these elephants, who happen to be Babar's cousins, are being attacked by the wild African savages who are cannibals. Now, I have no real black families in my life that were doing carpooling with, trading house chores with, raking each other's yards, snow blowing each other's driveways. My only understanding of people with dark skin is coming from media images, and at a young age, something like this. I can't remember it, but I have to guess that this would have been pretty scary to me. So if I'm filing away an association between dark skin and savage cannibal danger, doesn't that set me up to not really question it when I see the black guy doing the perp walk on the evening news? And I start being fed a narrative that black people are somehow dangerous? I think there's a connection. I had no reason to not believe that information as it got added to my belief system as I've gone through my life. Now look at this. This is what's on the next page in the book. Phew, we're back to my living room. This is civilized. Now we're back to the idea of, well, what's good? I was taught that this is what good looked like. And good was definitely white. And good had something to do with class in my world, too. I had some other stereotypes. This is Joe Jitsu, who did Dick Tracy's dirty work in the Dick Tracy cartoon, and he spoke with this horrific Chinese accent, which you know was voiced by some white guy in a sound studio in California. Think about that. How would that feel as a Chinese person who's left your entire life behind to come to this country, and this is how you're represented in mainstream media? 2 children. This was my entire understanding of Central and South America. Speedy Gonzales and Slowpoke Rodriguez. Now here's an image that was not from TV and not from my childhood. I found it on the internet, and it kind of blew me away because I immediately knew what I was looking at, and I had to ask myself, why is that so familiar to me? And I remembered growing up, so the Northwoods, my family spent a lot of time, my grandparents were actually from a town called Holton, Maine, in northern, right on the Canadian border of Maine. And we would go there for the summers, and on Saturdays we would go to the dump. And the 5 kids, we would get into that station wagon with my parents, and what my family would do before we went to the dump is they would sort the trash into 2 piles. One was the 100% trash, and the other was the not-so-trashy trash. So, for instance, one summer we replaced the screens on the screen porch because there were holes, and mosquitoes were getting in, and my mother made sure that we carefully rolled up these screens and we tied them with ribbons. And when we got to the dump, we would leave the not-so-trashy trash off at the perimeter of the dump. And as we left the dump, the kids would all turn around and look out the back window to see the Indians come and take our not-so-trashy trash. And this made me feel like a good person. I felt so glad to be from a family that would take the time to take their not-so-trashy screens and not-so-trashy trash and donate them to the needy Indians who were clearly having a hard time. What bothers me so much about this story is that I actually had another piece of information in my belief system, and I wonder why I didn't connect the dots. Let me show you what else was in my belief system. This is a map of Maine, And I don't know if those of you in the back can see, but there are red lines delineating the state. Those are land grants. So my family got a land grant. My family